In the heart of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's vibrant capital, the world's eyes turned to a historic moment. It was 2025, and a grand economic summit was about to unfold, promising a new chapter in the relationship between Burkina Faso and France. At the center of this event stood two leaders, Ibrahim Traoré, the young, fearless president of Burkina Faso, and Emmanuel Macron, the seasoned president of France. Their meeting was billed as a landmark alliance, a partnership that could reshape the future for both nations. Burkina Faso, a land of resilience and untapped potential, was ready to step onto the global stage. France, a global powerhouse, saw an opportunity to expand its influence in Africa. But beneath the polished speeches and diplomatic handshakes, a storm was brewing, one that would challenge the old ways of power and ignite a movement across the continent. Ibrahim Traoré was no ordinary leader. At just 37, he had already captured the hearts of his people with his bold vision for a free and independent Burkina Faso. He came to power in 2022, leading a movement to break free from decades of foreign influence that had kept his country in chains. Traoré spoke of dignity, of a Burkina Faso that would stand tall, not as a pawn in global games, but as a nation in control of its own destiny. His fiery speeches and unwavering commitment to his people made him a symbol of hope, not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa. For this summit, he prepared meticulously, knowing that the world would judge his every move. He wasn't here to beg for aid, he was here to demand respect. Emmanuel Macron, on the other hand, carried the weight of France's long history in Africa. France had once ruled vast parts of the continent, and even after independence, its influence lingered through economic deals, military presence, and cultural ties. Macron saw himself as a modern leader, eager to reshape France's image in Africa. He arrived in Ouagadougou with promises of massive investments, roads, power plants, schools, all backed by France's biggest companies. But his vision came with strings attached. France wanted access to Burkina Faso's markets and resources, and Macron believed his country's wealth and power gave him the upper hand. He was used to leading negotiations, setting terms, and walking away with what France wanted. He underestimated Traoré, seeing him as a young leader from a small nation, easily swayed by the promise of aid. The summit began with all the pomp and ceremony expected of such a high-stakes event. Delegates from both nations filled the conference hall, their voices buzzing with anticipation. The first day was filled with warm words and grand promises. Macron spoke of a new partnership built on mutual benefit, his polished tone winning smiles from the crowd. Traoré responded with equal grace, thanking France for its interest and outlining his vision for a stronger Burkina Faso. Agreements were drafted, outlining French investments in energy and infrastructure. In return, Burkina Faso would open its markets to French companies. On paper, it looked like a win for both sides. The world watched, hopeful that this alliance could be a model for cooperation between Africa and Europe. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. Macron's team pushed for terms that favored France, contracts that gave French companies control over key projects, with profits flowing back to Paris. Traoré's advisors warned him that these deals could trap Burkina Faso in a cycle of dependency, much like the old colonial days. Traoré listened carefully, his calm demeanor hiding a growing resolve. He had promised his people a future free from foreign control, and he wasn't about to break that promise. As the summit moved into its second day, the stage was set for a showdown that would change everything. As the economic summit in Ouagadougou entered its critical phase, the air grew thick with tension. What began as a hopeful partnership between Burkina Faso and France was unraveling, not because of loud arguments but through subtle, dangerous shifts in tone. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's resolute president, sat across from Emmanuel Macron, France's confident leader, in a room filled with advisors and delegates. The world expected a deal to be signed, but Traoré sensed something troubling in Macron's words. Behind the French president's charming smile lay a plan to tilt the partnership in France's favor, and Traoré was not about to let his country be outplayed. Macron's approach started to change during the second day's negotiations. His speeches, once warm and diplomatic, took on a sharper edge. He spoke of necessary conditions for France's investments, as if Burkina Faso had no choice but to accept. In one meeting, he leaned forward, his voice smooth but firm, and said, "Ibrahim, you must understand that global markets have rules. French companies need guarantees, priority access, tax breaks, and control over major projects. This is how partnerships work." His words carried a hint of arrogance, as if he believed Burkina Faso's needs were secondary to France's profits. To Macron, this was just another deal, one where France's power would set the terms. Traore listened quietly, his face calm but his eyes sharp with focus. He had studied France's history in Africa, decades of deals that left African nations rich in resources but poor in wealth, their economies tied to foreign powers. He knew Macron's guarantees were code for control, a way to lock Burkina Faso into agreements that would benefit Paris while leaving Ouagadougou with crumbs. The other delegates in the room shifted uncomfortably, sensing the growing friction. Macron's advisors nodded in approval, confident their leader was steering the talks. But Traore was no ordinary negotiator. He was a man who carried the hopes of millions, and he wasn't here to bow. A pivotal moment as Macron pushed for a major energy contract that would give French firms dominance, Traore spoke up. His voice was steady, cutting through the room like a blade. "Mr. President, let me be clear. Burkina Faso welcomes partnerships, but not at the cost of our dignity. This is not a favor you're offering, it's an agreement between equals. If your terms only serve France, we have no deal." The room fell silent. Macron's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by the leader of a nation he saw as small and dependent. "Ibrahim," he replied, his tone colder, "you're new to this game. Power decides these matters. France is offering you a lifeline, don't mistake it for charity." Those words lit a fire in Traore. He straightened in his chair, his gaze locked on Macron. "Power, Mr. President, comes from the people, not from wealth or influence. The Burkina people chose me to protect their future, and I will not trade it for your promises. If you think Burkina Faso is a small player to be bullied, you've misjudged us." His words carried a quiet strength, resonating with every delegate in the room. Macron's face tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but the laughter was hollow. For the first time, he realized Traore was not just a young leader. He was a force, unyielding and unafraid. The standoff marked a turning point. Traore's refusal to bend sent a message. Burkina Faso would not be a pawn in France's chess game. As the meeting ended, Macron's team scrambled to regroup, while Traore's advisors exchanged proud glances. The summit was no longer about signing a deal. It was about redefining what it meant to be an African nation in a world of giants. The economic summit in Ouagadougou had reached a boiling point. The air was heavy with unspoken challenges as Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's unyielding president, faced off against Emmanuel Macron, France's determined leader. What was meant to be a historic partnership had turned into a battle of wills, with Traoré refusing to accept terms that would bind his nation to France's interests. Macron, stung by Traoré's defiance, doubled down, believing his experience and France's global clout would force Burkina Faso to yield. But Traoré was not a man to be swayed by pressure, and the events that unfolded would shake the foundations of international diplomacy. In the summit's final session, Macron made one last push to salvage the deal. He stood before the delegates, his voice laced with a mix of charm and warning. "Ibrahim, let's be reasonable," he said, his eyes fixed on Traoré. "France is offering you a path to progress, roads, schools, energy, but we need assurances that our investments are secure. Without our support, Burkina Faso risks standing alone in a harsh world. Think carefully about what you're rejecting." His words were a thinly veiled threat, implying that Traoré's defiance would leave his country isolated and vulnerable. The room held its breath, waiting for Traoré's response. Traoré rose slowly, his presence commanding attention. He looked directly at Macron, his voice calm but filled with steel. "Mr. President, you speak of support, but what you offer is control. Burkina Faso is not a child in need of your guidance. We are a sovereign nation with a future we will shape ourselves. Your terms would chain us to your profits while our people gain little. I reject this deal, not because I fear standing alone, but because I believe in standing tall." His words echoed with conviction, sending a ripple of shock through the delegates. Macron's face hardened, his composure cracking under the weight of Traoré's resolve. Macron, unaccustomed to such direct rejection, tried to regain control. "You're making a grave mistake, Ibrahim," he said, his tone sharp with frustration. "France does not negotiate with ultimatums. If you walk away, you'll face the consequences alone." But Traoré was unmoved. "The only mistake," he replied, "is thinking you can dictate our future. The Burkina people are my strength, not your promises. If France cannot respect us as equals, there is no partnership to be had." With that, he signaled to his advisors, and they began to leave the room. The summit, once a beacon of hope, collapsed in a moment of raw defiance. As Traoré walked away, Macron sat in stunned silence. He had underestimated his opponent, believing his power would overwhelm a young leader from a small nation. But Traore had turned the tables, exposing France's tactics to the world. News of the summit's failure spread like wildfire. In Burkina Faso, the people rallied behind Traore, seeing his stand as a victory for their dignity. Across Africa, leaders and citizens alike took notice, inspired by a president who dared to say no to a global power. International media buzzed with commentary. Some called Traore reckless, others hailed him as a hero of African independence. In the days that followed, Macron's team tried to downplay the humiliation, issuing statements about misunderstandings and future opportunities. But the damage was done. Traore's rejection was more than a failed deal. It was a declaration that Burkina Faso would not bow to foreign pressure. At a press conference, Traore addressed his nation and the world. "We do not need outsiders to define our worth," he said. "Our resources, our talents, our dreams, these are enough to build a future where every Burkinabe thrives." His words lit a spark, not just in Burkina Faso, but across a continent ready to break free from old chains. The collapse of the Ouagadougou summit sent shockwaves far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president who had stood up to France's Emmanuel Macron, became a symbol of defiance and hope. While the world debated his bold move, Traoré wasted no time. He knew that rejecting France's deal was only the first step. Now, he had to prove that Burkina Faso could thrive without bending to foreign powers. With the eyes of his people and the continent on him, Traoré launched a bold plan to transform his nation and inspire a new era of African unity. Back home, Traoré's rejection of the French deal electrified the Burkinabe people. Crowds gathered in the streets of Ouagadougou, chanting his name and waving flags, proud of a leader who chose dignity over dependency. Traoré seized this moment to speak directly to his nation. At a packed press conference, he declared, "Burkina Faso's future lies in our hands. We have land, resources, and a spirit that cannot be broken. It's time to build a nation where every citizen has a voice and a chance to succeed." His words were a call to action, and he backed them with a sweeping set of reforms to strengthen Burkina Faso from within. Traoré's government rolled out ambitious projects to boost the economy and empower the people. New schools and hospitals sprang up in rural areas, giving families access to education and health care. Renewable energy projects like solar farms brought power to remote villages, lighting up homes and businesses. Traoré invested heavily in training programs for young Burkinabe, preparing them to lead in fields like technology, agriculture, and engineering. "Our youth are our greatest asset," he said. "They will carry Burkina Faso into a future we define ourselves." These changes weren't just about buildings or jobs. They were about restoring pride and proving that Burkina Faso could stand on its own. But Traoré's vision stretched beyond his borders. He saw Burkina Faso stand as a spark for a broader movement, one that could unite Africa against the shadows of colonial influence. He announced a Pan-African conference to be held in Ouagadougou, inviting leaders from across the continent to forge a new path. "The time for Africa to speak with one voice is now," Traoré declared. "We must create a future where our nations support each other, not foreign powers who see us as pawns." The conference drew leaders from dozens of countries, all inspired by Traoré's courage. They signed a historic pact, pledging to build an African common market based on equality, shared resources, and mutual respect. This was a bold step toward a united Africa, free from external control. Meanwhile, in France, Emmanuel Macron grappled with the fallout. The summit's failure was a public embarrassment, and France's influence in Africa was slipping. Macron tried to regain ground, sending private messages to Traoré, offering a new meeting with better terms. But Traoré was cautious. He knew Macron's offers were likely a tactic to save face, not a genuine shift in approach. Instead of rushing to negotiate, Traoré focused on strengthening Burkina Faso's new alliances with African nations and emerging powers like China and Russia, who showed interest in partnerships without strings attached. "Any deal we make," Traoré told his advisors, "must honor our sovereignty. We've broken the chains, now we stay free." France, unwilling to admit defeat, turned to subtler tactics. French businesses, sensing opportunity in Burkina Faso's reforms, approached Traoré directly, proposing investments in infrastructure and education. Unlike Macron's earlier demands, these offers seemed respectful, but Traoré remained vigilant. "We welcome partners," he said, "but only those who see us as equals." His words sent a clear message. Burkina Faso was open to cooperation, but it would never again be manipulated. As Traore's star rose, France's grip on the region weakened, and Africa began to dream of a future shaped by its own hands. Ibrahim Traoré's stand against France had set Africa ablaze with possibility. The failed summit in Ouagadougou was no longer just a moment of defiance. It was the spark that ignited a movement. Burkina Faso, under Traoré's leadership, was transforming into a beacon of independence, and its influence was spreading across the continent and beyond. As 2025 turned into 2026, Traoré's vision for a sovereign, united Africa began to take shape, challenging old power structures and inspiring nations to rethink their place in the world. But the journey was far from over, and Traoré knew that every step forward would test his resolve. The Pan-African Conference in Ouagadougou had changed the game. African leaders, inspired by Traoré's courage, began to act on the pact they had signed. They launched initiatives to boost trade between African nations, reducing their reliance on foreign markets. Countries shared technology, resources, and expertise, building a network of cooperation that made Africa stronger as a whole. Traoré's Burkina Faso led by example, exporting its agricultural innovations and renewable energy solutions to neighbors like Mali and Niger. Africa's wealth is in its people and its unity, Traoré said at a regional summit. When we stand together, no one can hold us back. His words became a rallying cry, echoing in capitals from Addis Ababa to Accra. But the world was watching, and not everyone was pleased. France, still reeling from its loss of influence, tried to isolate Burkina Faso through diplomatic pressure. Emmanuel Macron, stung by his defeat, pushed European allies to limit trade with Traoré's government. Yet these efforts backfired. The European Union, sensing a shift in global dynamics, saw Africa's rise as an opportunity, not a threat. In a surprising move, EU diplomats reached out to Traoré, proposing a new kind of partnership. Unlike France's earlier demands, this offer was different. "We've learned from past mistakes," one EU representative told Traoré. "We want to work with Africa as equals, supporting your goals without controlling your future." Traoré, ever cautious, studied the proposal carefully. He knew that accepting any deal required vigilance to avoid new traps. After months of talks, Burkina Faso and the EU signed a groundbreaking agreement in 2026. It focused on sustainable development, schools, clean energy, and healthcare, with Burkina Faso retaining full control over its resources and decisions. The deal became a model for other African nations, who soon signed similar agreements with the EU, China, and South American countries. This network of fair partnerships marked a new era, one where Africa chose its allies based on respect, not dependency. Traoré's vision of an African-led future was coming to life. Globally, Traoré's leadership earned him praise as a transformative figure. Journalists and analysts called him the architect of a new Africa, a leader who proved that small nations could challenge giants and win. Burkina Faso's economy grew steadily, fueled by Traoré's reforms and new trade ties. Schools churned out skilled graduates, hospitals saved lives, and solar panels powered villages that once sat in darkness. The Burkinabe people, once weighed down by foreign influence, walked with pride, knowing their country was theirs to shape. Traoré remained grounded, always returning to his roots. "This is not my victory," he told a cheering crowd. "It's ours, every farmer, teacher, and child who believes in our future." As years passed, Burkina Faso became a symbol of what Africa could achieve. Other nations followed Traoré's lead, rejecting unequal deals and building their own paths. France, forced to adapt, softened its approach, but its influence in Africa never fully recovered. Traoré's legacy was not just a stronger Burkina Faso, but a continent that dared to dream big. He showed the world that true freedom comes from standing firm, uniting with others, and never compromising on dignity. Africa was no longer a playground for powers. It was a force, rising under leaders like Traoré, ready to write its own story. And so the chains of the past were broken. Ibrahim Traoré, once a young soldier, became a name etched in history, a man who defied empires, lifted his people, and gave Africa a new voice. His journey reminds us all that change begins with courage, and that together we can build a world where every nation, no matter its size, stands tall.